Okay, so we'll cycle through all of the tabs real quick. Ignore the scatter plots, just focusing on the line graphs. So each one of the line graphs show a positive increase in life expectancy across the different variables. Variables being like white male, white female, black female. So this one's where they give you a life expectancy at birth. 1950, they give you for, see, a black male, somewhere around, so 59 years. So if you were born in, I guess if you were born in 1950, black male, you were given 59 years. Whereas in 2015-ish, when you're born and you're a black male, you're given 72 years. All right, so that's what these graphs show. But the difference or the increase in life expectancy over that range. Cycling through all these line graphs, all of them show a positive increase. So this is at age 65 in 1950, they gave you 13 more years as a black male. White male, they gave you about the same. But in 2014, they give you 16 more years. Looks like they're saying on average 16 more years for a black male, 18 more years for a white male. So this one's interesting right off the bat because both white and black men were given about the same amount of life expectancy at age 75 back in 1950. But right now in 2014, white men have 18 years versus 16, so 2 more years on average, I guess, life expectancy. Looks like white females were the most relative, and actually same thing with females, because white and black females were about the same amount back in 1950 at age 65, but white females increased to 20 from 15 years. Black females went from 14.9, so say 15, to 19.6, so almost 20. So they're about the same, but still interesting to see that white females were a little bit more. So at 75, same thing. It looks like they're, I don't know, for whatever reason, this one starts at 1980. I'll have to look at that one. So a lot of them showed 1980. I'll have to look at that. Okay, so this one shows at age 75, all races. Okay, there, by gender. So all genders, male, female, because that was the very first graph of data showing the combination of white and black. So at age 75, white by gender. So this is just male versus female for whites. With a combined, so the blue is always going to be kind of like an average. It's always going to be in the middle between male and female. Again, all showing positive increases from the past versus now. I don't know why it's showing 1980. We'll have to take a look at that. So here's similar. So this is just focusing. So this was 75 at age 75. They gave you, 8 more years, back in 1980, relative to now. They give you that's a little bit above 11 for males. So at age 75 for Black and African American, you can see again all positive increases. So like every single one of these graphs show positive increases, which is good. I mean, it shows from again 1950. You have to see. Oh, so look, maybe it looks like there wasn't a lot of data points between 1950 and 1980. But anyway, all upward trajectory, which is good, you know. And so the question there and the conversation around that is why are we seeing increases in life expectancy across the board, all races, all genders, at all age groups? You know, is that a reflection of medicine, healthcare, environment, diets, um, everything across the board? I guess, you know, that opens up that question as to why are we seeing an increase across the board, with all age groups, all genders, all races. So 65 focusing on white people, male versus female, again in an average, all upward trajectories between 1950 and recently. 65, this one should say black and African American, although you could label it whatever, but so same thing, all upwards trajectories. Now these line graphs, what I tried to do was have the same scale. So 65 white from 12 years to 22 years. 65 focusing on black, 12 to 22, right? So it's the same scale on the y-axis. So if you were to overlay these two, you would see essentially that, you know, white has, you know, starts off higher, ends higher, or whatever. But the purpose there is to show, if you wanted to show the two graphs side by side, they have the same scale, right? So if you had a different scale, they could look the same, but the truth is that the numbers would be different. So trying to use the same scale is important. Okay, so we went through 75, all races, white, black, 65, all races, white, black. Now we're focusing on birth, and I did the same thing here. So they should all have the same scale between 55 years and 85 years. So back in 1950, the orange is a male. At birth, you were given 65 years. This is all races combined. The combined one, I don't know if that has as much value relative to white versus black. So focusing on white, same scale, 55 years to 85 years. 1950, male, you were given 66 years on average life expectancy. Whereas in 2014, 15, 16-ish, it increased to 76 years. So 66 to 76 years. So to your point, the one thing that we don't show on here is the number of years that were increased. It could be a good metric to show. Again, the blue is always all genders. It's combined. I don't even know if that's really all that relevant, outside of the fact that, you know, you continue to see an upward trajectory. But the averages between the two, I'm not really sure that that's as relevant. I think male versus female, white versus black shows, like, you know, more information there. All right, so birth white, birth black. So here, you know, again, if you were to look at these side by side, white versus black, it's the same scale here, 55 years to 85 years. But you see that the white was higher. So by having the same scale, it makes the two graphs relevant to each other. All right, so so the point of all this is that by looking at the line graphs, we're seeing across the board at all age groups, all genders, all races, upward trajectories from 1950 to to recent 2016, 2017, whatever the data shows. What this doesn't show is the number of years increased for each, but to our point earlier, the percent changes. So that's where these graphs come into play. So focusing on this first one here on the left, percent change in life expectancy comparing the year 1950 versus 2017. I put a dash in there, but you could say 1950 versus 2017, because we're really just looking at two data points: the data point at 1950 and the data point at 2017. We're not really looking at anything in between, quite honestly. We could break this out based on decades, and you could have like you could see the percent change over each decade, but this looks at the very first data point in 1950. We ignore basically everything else in between, and we look at the end point in 2017. So each one of these has 3 sections focusing on the data at birth, the data at 65, and at 75. Now these bars represent the percent change. So at birth, white male versus female. So blue is male. So if we focus on this very first one, each one of these bars like tells a story. But comparing the two tells a whole separate story. So, between 1950 and 2017, white males on the blue, they saw an increase of 15% in the life expectancy. So, if we were to go back to, let's see, birth white, is that the one? Yeah, so this was actually one of the last ones that we looked at. So at 15%. So at birth, white male. So at birth, white male. So in this case, it's orange. So at birth, back in 1950, you were given an average of 66 years. Relative to now, again, we're looking at this data point and we're looking at this data point. We're really not looking at anything else in between. So now you're given 76 years. If you were born in 2014-ish, you're given a life expectancy of 76 years. So 66 to 76 is a 15% increase. So we're going to go back to the data. So male, white at birth. So if we go all the way back here, it's male, white at birth. So here's at birth, white, male. So in 1950, it was 66.5, and then the latest data point is 76.6. So if we go here, we take our ending value of 76.6 and our beginning of 66.5, calculate. So 15% increase, right? So this is kind of like our check. So if we go back to our data here, white, male, at birth, 15% increase, right? And if we go to our charts, there's that 15% right there. So we could go through that example of kind of double checking our data across the board, but I'm just going to do it for that one. And if we look at this, the formula is up here. So we said on tab A, cell F46 minus tab A F7. So F46 minus F7 divided by F7. That's how we get the percent change. That comes out to a decimal point, and then all of these fields are formatted to be a percentage. So it'll come out as a percent. So if we go back here, anyway, that's how you get the formula. So you take the ending value, you subtract the beginning value, and then you divide it by the beginning value. That'll give you a percentage point, and then you just format it as a percentage, and it'll come out to 15%. And if you look at every single one of these, that's how they're calculated. All right, so back to this. So white male from 1950 to 2017, their life expectancy increased by 15%. White females increased by 13%. So those two bars are relatively close. The numbers are relatively close. So you could argue that both white male and female life expectancy grew at the same percentage between 1950 and 2017. So white male versus female, their life expectancy basically saw the same change, which, again, the question is why did both male and female, white male and female, grow at about the same percentage? Now, when you focus on the number of years that they were given for life expectancy at age 65, again between 1950 and 2017, male versus female. Males grew 41%. Females grew 36%. So relative to each other, um, they're close enough. I mean, I don't know statistically like where you draw a line, but 36 to 41%, I mean, they're fairly close to each other. So arguably they grew about the same. But at age 75, that's where it gets interesting, because men, their life expectancy saw a 27% increase between 1950 and 2017. So in 1950, the 75-year-olds were only given a certain number of years. But fast forward 50, 60, 7 years, they're now looking at a 27% increase over, the 75-year-olds during 1950. But females only saw a 12% increase. So that's interesting. And then this is where we might want to go back at the data and take a look at the ages, or the number of years rather, given to each of them, because I mean, I guess men were probably given a less number of years to live at 75 relative to women. But the question is what changed over that 67-year period, or whatever it is, to cause men to increase that much, at least relative to women, for the white population. So same thing across these other graphs. The next one focuses on black and African American, male versus female. The same argument applies. So male versus female, 22% to 25%, they're close enough. They grew at about the same. The percent change rather was about the same. At age 65, men versus women, 27 to 32%. Again, pretty much the same, arguably. Interestingly, I mean, now the gap starts to widen a little bit at age 75. So same thing as white men, or white male versus female, black male versus female. Black saw almost a 10% increase over men over women. So that starts to get into like the significant area, probably. And then the question is why? Focusing on the next one. So now we're just looking at men, white versus black. So at birth, white men are now given 15% more, but black men are actually given 22% more. So that's interesting. But this is where those line graphs come into play, because if we remember, the life expectancy of whites was generally higher than blacks. So this shows an interesting story, in that the percent change at birth now for black men, they're given a 22% more, longer life expectancy nowadays than when they were given back in 1950. Whereas white men are only given 15%, but black men had a lower life expectancy to begin with. Right, so I think that's where the line graphs still add value, because they show that, like if we go back to white versus black at birth, so birth, white versus black. So if we looked at white male versus black male, the blue versus the gray, see the gray is so much lower than the blue. So even though, and you can actually kind of see like the slope here of the gray, it's a little bit steeper than the blue, so that shows that the percent increase was higher. Just by looking at this, we can see that the percentage is probably going to be higher, because the slope of it is kind of like at a greater angle than the blue. But when you look at the relative numbers, I mean, white men still have a higher life expectancy than black men. So even though black men saw a greater increase, you're still not equal to each other. So that's an interesting topic to dive into. Why can't, like, it you could see, it would be interesting to see an even greater increase in percentage for black men, like a lot greater, so long as black men equaled white men in life expectancy, but they still don't. So even though the percentage increase was greater for black men, you know, the total life expectancy is still less than white men. I think I said that correctly. Um, so that was at birth. So this is male, white versus black at birth. At 65, this is interesting again. So at age 65, white men saw a 41% increase, but black men only saw 27% increase. You know, so again, what's the story behind that? But interestingly, at age 75, both white and black men saw the same percentage increase. But again, we know, looking at the line chart, that white men have a higher life expectancy. It's just that the percent change between 1950 and 2017 just happened to be about the same. So that's why these bar graphs, they show an interesting story, you know, when you're looking at two percentages between each other, but it doesn't tell the full story. It really answers, you know, if groups changed at the same rate, not necessarily the same numbers, right? So like, you can have two groups that both increased by 5 years, but because the starting points were different, the percent change will be different. So the last one, life expectancy. So this just focused on females. So white females 13%, black females 25%. So that's huge. That's a huge gap right there. You know, the question is why. So like at birth, white versus black. So if we go back to the birth, white versus black, and we focused on the women, so that was orange and yellow. So that's interesting because, so black females here, you can actually see, that's why this is interesting because they're not too far apart. So white females are at 76 years. So if you're born in 2015, you're a white female, you are given a life expectancy of 76 years. If you're a black female born in 2015, you're given a life expectancy of, there it is, 78 years. So 78 versus 76, so 2 additional years. But this is interesting because black women started at such a smaller number relative to white women. So they started at an average age life expectancy of 62, 63 years back in 1950, relative to white women, which were given a life expectancy of 66 years. So that's why we see the percent change so much higher for black women versus white women. It's because black women, their life expectancy started off so much lower. And this is, you know, essentially, I mean, you would want to see, I guess, arguably, when you're looking at social economics and access to healthcare and I don't know, all the different variables that you could speak to, you would want to see every single one of these, at least with male and men and women, you would want to see them ending around the same amount. But like, this one's interesting. The black men is still so much further apart from white men. So that's all that's the percentage change, you know, from 1950 relative to 2017, and then in the life expectancy of these different groups. So same thing, percentage change 2006 charts. They're all showing the same thing, but it's using the second grouping of data, which is a smaller time frame, but it includes Hispanic. So here, this first one just focuses on white. This one's almost irrelevant because the previous charts take care of white male versus female, right? Didn't we have that? Yeah, white male versus female, black male versus female. And this kind of like touches on what I mentioned earlier. Like, you could you could break out the data by decades and show like the percent changes by decade. And then and if you saw like a huge jump between decades, the question would be what happened in that decade to cause such a huge change. So really, this is kind of touching on that scenario where you break out a smaller subset of data, right? Because this is only showing 2006 to 2017 relative to 1950 to 2017. It, you know, I'm not sure you would want to get that granular with data, but depending on how you wanted to slice and dice everything, it might be interesting to look at it. So this is almost irrelevant. White male versus female, black male versus female. So this one's going to be new because this is Hispanic. Here we see male, female. So they grew at, or the percent change rather was 2% for both. So, they grew at the same amount. At age 65, they grew at the same amount, and at 75, they grew at the same amount. Again, it's a much smaller time frame, so arguably not a lot has changed there. But I mean, this is interesting because you're looking at recent times in 2006 to 2017. It'd be interesting to look at the data from 1950 up to 2006. Like if all of these are the same, well, these these are the same. These are close. There's a little bit of a gap there. I mean, this is double. I'd be curious. It's probably arguable that you'd probably see the largest changes between 1950 and maybe 1990. Just guessing. But these last two graphs. So this is where we get into the comparison of just males, white versus black versus Hispanic. So white men only saw a 1% increase. Black men 5%, Hispanic 6%. So that's interesting. That over the last 15-ish years, and it's not even a full 15. Black men and Hispanic men saw a pretty big increase relative to white men. At age 65, same thing. I mean, white men saw a 3% increase relative to black men at 7%, and Hispanics 10%. So relative to each other, 3% versus 7%. I mean, 7% is over double, 10% is over triple, right? So Hispanic men at the age of 65, their life expectancy within this past 15 years, they're seeing a 10% increase, which is triple what white men have seen. Now, again, looking at the numbers, my guess is that white men are at the top of as long as they're ever going to live, right? So at some point you would want to see the actual life expectancy all equal each other. So even though these percent increases are different, the actual number of years are still different. So if we found our let's see, at birth, where was it? Oh yeah, it's right here. So 2006 so if we looked at it at 65, so this is all the tabs starting with 2006. These three, they're focusing on that data. So 2006, 65. What was I looking at? I forgot. Oh, at 65. So white men only saw 3%, but Hispanic saw 10. So white men blue, Hispanic darker blue. So Hispanic men, they were given 18 more years to live back in 2006 versus now, give or take almost 20 years. I mean, it's not that huge of the number of years isn't that huge, but I guess the percent increase, that's where like the bar graphs, like they can be a little bit misleading. I mean, again, you're all seeing positive movement, but like Hispanic females, man, that's interesting. They probably saw the greatest. All right, so we go back here. So male by race, so white males 2%, black 6%, Hispanic 8%, Again, relative to each other, black men, Hispanic men saw a greater increase, greater percent change. Females, whites saw almost no change in that, 11-year period. Black female 3%. So Hispanics and black females, the percent change was equal to each other. At age 65, black and Hispanic females saw a double in the percentage relative to white women, and triple at 75. But if we go to 2006, 75, so here we can see the females. So yellow, dark blue, and green. So yellow, dark blue, and green. So that's interesting. So again, like even though Hispanic females saw almost, I think, the greatest increase, they're also the highest. So what's up with that? That's where you can answer it. All right, good luck. I'm out.